Hey, Good News family, it's Pastor Sam. Historically, the church has seen the week between Palm Sunday and Resurrection Sunday as a holy week. Because during that week, Christ did so many essential things which ultimately make you and I a holy people. And so this week, we're going to spend some time hearing from God's word and walking together through some of the many stories of Jesus's trials and tribulations and ultimately his crucifixion as we walk through this Holy Week. Today, we're going to be looking at Luke's Gospel, Luke 22, starting at verse 63. Now, the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. And they also blindfolded him, and they kept asking him, "Well, prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. But when day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council. And they said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea from Galilee even to this place." But when Pilate heard this, he asked whether this man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him, and Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt, and they mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him." We know tragically Jesus should have gone free, and yet he doesn't. The only word that we could use really to describe what Jesus is experiencing is a word that has become wrapped in political debate. But as a church, friends, we can't avoid using biblical words. We can't avoid using biblical concepts because there is a danger that they get caught up in the debates of the moment. And the thing that Jesus experienced here can only be called injustice. In fact, there are a number of ways that Jesus experiences true injustice in this passage. For starters, we're told that much of this is transpiring at night. He was taken and arrested by the high priest and questioned by them. But trials weren't meant to take place at night, so they held him illegally, mocking him and hurting him. We're actually told that that night they blindfold him and they beat him, and they say, well, if you're really a prophet, which one of us hit you? And it's only finally in the morning when they can properly convene their trial of Jesus does this beating actually end. And so it says in verse 66 that when the day came, they assembled the elders and the people, and they gathered together. And they demand that Christ testify against himself. They're trying to catch him in his own words, but he knows that they're trying to catch him. But there, Jesus just clearly recognizes that he is the Son of Man, and that in the future he will be seated at the right hand of God. And with that, they are furious. So furious that they say, that's it. All we need to do now is to bring him to Pilate. But when they bring him to Pilate, he experiences a further injustice. Because in the course of their hearing, they make no mention of Caesar. And yet the first thing they say to Pilate is that Jesus is trying to disrupt the peace and that he is claiming to be an earthly king. And yet again, when Jesus is asked, are you a king? His response is, you say that I'm a king. But the kingship that Pilate was concerned about was so small in comparison to the kind of kingship that Christ was talking about. Pilate says to him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, well, you say that I'm the king of the Jews. And Jesus is in fact king of the Jews, and he's king of the Gentiles. He's king of the dry land. He's king of the oceans. He's king of the sky. He's king of the cosmos. He's king of the microscopic, and he's king of the telescopic. He's king of the things seen and things unseen. But Pilate couldn't process all of that. But he saw that Jesus was innocent. And yet he did not care. And so on the one hand, the elders that bring Jesus before Pilate commit an injustice of lying and perjuring about who Jesus was. But Christ also in this moment experienced the injustice of political officials that do not care about doing the right things and instead do the convenient things. And so Pilate finds a technicality. Pilate says, oh, this man is a Galilean, and therefore he really should first be tried by Herod, who just happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. And so they send Jesus off to Herod, and Herod was excited to see Jesus because Herod was hoping for a spectacle. It doesn't matter that Jesus had been beaten. It doesn't matter that he had been accosted. What mattered was that he might give Herod a good show. And it says that before Herod and his soldiers, the chief priests and the scribes, they all accused him. And they treated him with contempt and they mocked him. Some injustice is the breaking of human laws, like Jesus being held at night, like people lying about what he says. There are some injustices that can be seen in the civil system, but there are some injustices that go so far beyond the rules of men. It wasn't just that Jesus was beaten. It wasn't just that he was held and that lies were thrown against him. It wasn't just that the elders and the priests made accusations against him to Pilate. It wasn't just that he was held for amusement. This was Emmanuel, God with us. And instead of his people bringing worship, instead of his people bringing praise, instead of his people bringing sacrifice, bringing adoration, bringing their love and their thanks and their praise, they're bringing their hate. They're bringing their bitterness. They're bringing their accusations. They're bringing their murderous anger and wrath. I want you to know there is nothing going on in your life that Christ does not understand. No wrong that you're experiencing, no pain, no hurt, no rejection, no attack that Jesus cannot sympathize with. The world is absolutely full of many injustices. The world is full of evil people getting off scot-free, and innocent people being put in jail. Those things absolutely happen. But in this trial, the only truly innocent man that ever lived was shown to be guiltless and held as guilty, so that one day, guilty men and women like you and I could be called not just guiltless, but holy, redeemed, washed, saved, loved.